Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday the 28th of May in London. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, an Egyptian soldier is killed in a clash with Israeli troops at the Gaza border, while international condemnation of the Rafah offensive grows. More than 120 business leaders sign a letter supporting the UK Labour Party's economic plans. Plus, one day, US investors gear up for a major shift in the speed at which trades are settled. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. An Egyptian soldier has been killed during a clash with Israeli troops at the Rafah border crossing in Gaza. The death comes after an Israeli airstrike killed an estimated 45 Palestinians at a camp for displaced people in the territory. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it was a tragic mistake.
In Rafah, we have already evacuated about 1 million non-involved residents. And despite our best efforts not to harm the non-involved, unfortunately a technical failure happened. We're investigating the case.
Netanyahu's words, spoken there by a translator, have done little to quell the growing international anger over the strike. French President Emmanuel Macron said he was outraged, while the White House said the images of innocent civilians killed in the strike were heartbreaking. More than 120 UK business leaders have signed an open letter endorsing the Labour Party's economic policies. They say the party has changed and deserves a chance to run the country. Bloomberg's Chris Pitt has more.
Jeremy Corbyn's Labour leadership notably spooked many business leaders. But since Keir Starmer took over the party, he and his shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves have been on a mission to woo execs. Today, we got some evidence that the so-called smoked salmon and scrambled eggs offensive has paid off. More than 120 business leaders have signed an open letter in the Times newspaper saying Labour now wants to work with business. The founder of Wikipedia, the UK president of advertising giant WPP, and the ex-CEO of Aston Martin have all offered their signatures. And while no FTSE 100 CEOs have given their endorsement, the list is notably longer than the one that David Cameron's team put together ahead of the 2015 election. In London, Chris Pitt, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is promising pensioners a tax cut worth £2.4 billion should he win re-election. In a speech later, he'll pledge to increase the tax-free allowance for retired people in line with the so-called triple lock, which guarantees increases in the state pension. The plans triggered an immediate row about public spending, but the Conservative leader says he has turned the economy around.
Inflation down, back to normal at 2%. Energy bills falling, the economy growing faster than Germany, France, America. Wages have been rising faster than prices for 10 months now. The plan is working.
The Prime Minister is seeking to close the 20-point polling gap with Labour with new policies, including bringing back national service for 18-year-olds. The ideas are mostly popular with older voters, suggesting Tory fears around losing support to the right-wing Reform UK party. UK shop price inflation is slowing as the election approaches. The news adds to signs of an improving economic outlook. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
In the first week of May, the pace of price increases in UK shops was the slowest in more than 2 years. The British Retail Consortium says retailers cut the prices of big-ticket items in a bid to revive consumer demand. Its survey shows food price inflation slowing to 3.2% in May, while the prices of non-food products fell for the second month in a row. That's meant football fans have been able to secure bargains on TVs and other audiovisual equipment ahead of this summer's Euros tournament. The bad weather has dampened retail sales in recent months, and retail intelligence firm Nielsen IQ says the trend of lower prices is likely to continue. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
France and Germany are set to unveil plans to boost Europe's air defences. The move is in response to growing pressure for Europeans to strengthen their own security in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz will discuss options when they meet later today. Macron is on a state visit to Germany, where he's repeated calls for a buy-European strategy in sectors like defence and a massive increase in EU public financing. And starting today, the world's largest capital market will settle trades just one day after they are executed. The move to the so-called T+1 system means that in the US, investors no longer have to wait more than 24 hours to take ownership of the stocks they purchase or to receive payment for the stocks they sell. The Securities and Exchange Commission says the shorter settlement window means lower odds that the buyer or seller might default just before a transaction is completed. However, just 9% of sell-side firms polled by Coalition Greenwich in April and May said they expect the T+1 switch to go smoothly. Now, in a moment, we'll get more on the developments in Gaza, plus bring you up to date with the latest from the UK election campaign. But another story that caught our eye this morning is Tokyo getting its own version of New York's High Line. Our colleague Mia Glass has been writing about this. This is a plan to use some of the KK line, known as the Tokyo Expressway, as an elevated pedestrian walkway. So it's currently a roadway. It's about 2 kilometres long, the section they're talking about changing, which borders the Ginza district in the centre of the capital. Now, it'll be much wider than the Coulée Verte in Paris or the High Line in New York. So will include things like shops and other green spaces. The project set to partially open in 2029 with full completion aimed for the 2030s or 2040s. Could be a big shift, though, for Japanese cities to move space that's been allocated traditionally for cars towards other uses, and particularly pedestrian uses as well. So it could be an interesting change in Japanese cities as well. Well, let's get more now on the latest in Gaza after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the airstrike on a camp for displaced people in Rafah a tragic mistake. This is 3 European countries are set to formally recognise Palestinian statehood later today. Our Middle East breaking news editor Dana Craich joins us now for more. Dana, good morning. Let's start with just the events on the Gaza border crossing with Egypt. An Egyptian soldier killed in a clash with Israeli troops. What do we know about what happened and what does it mean for regional tensions?
Good morning. So we know there was a shooting incident on the border between Gaza and Egypt where Israeli forces are present. An Egyptian soldier was killed and both Egypt and Israel said they are investigating. While this is the first of its kind, it seemed both parties are interested in reducing tensions and not turn this incident into more than what it is, likely just an accident and not deliberate exchange of fire. Now, this is also significant because Egypt was the first Arab country to sign a peace deal with Israel, and keeping that border secure is, of course, paramount to both countries. But given how close Israeli forces are now to the Egypt border there, this might just happen again.
Benjamin Netanyahu has called the airstrike on a tent city in Rafah, where it's thought that 45 people were killed, a tragic mistake, but it's drawn condemnation too from elsewhere.
Indeed, yeah. We saw France's Macron condemning it, saying that the images out of Rafah were heartbreaking. But also we saw the White House saying it was actively engaging with Israel and partners in the region to better assess what had occurred. Now, images out of Gaza show tents on fire and wreckage from the strike. But the incident is an example of why the international community, including the U.S., were almost unanimously calling on Israel to refrain from launching an offensive on Rafah, where over 1 million Palestinians are sheltering, crammed in tiny spaces. Israel said that it acted based on precise intelligence and killed 2 senior members of Hamas, and that it was investigating what happened. And it is very tragic, and evident of that is what Benjamin Netanyahu has said, that it was a tragic mistake.
But of course, this is coming at a time where we had the International Court of Justice ruling only a few days ago, designed to halt the operations that Israel is conducting in Rafah. On the European diplomatic front, we have Ireland, Spain and Norway set to formally recognise Palestinian statehood today. EU foreign ministers meeting in Brussels discussed the possibility of sanctions on Israel if it doesn't comply with that ICJ order. How significant a shift are we seeing in the European position vis-a-vis the Israel-Hamas war?
It's a very strong signal from the EU, as you were saying, it hardening its stance against Israel's action in the war and trying to also pressure it to not only end the war, but also start the conversation on a 2-state solution, which Israel said or is completely against it. And this is evident, of course, in the recent decisions from last week of some European countries recognizing a Palestinian statehood. And we're seeing, like you said, Ireland, Spain and Norway are set to formally recognize that as well. So they're going to discuss potential measures if Israel doesn't comply. But Israel has made it clear that it won't comply with the ICJ ruling, of course, to halt operations in Rafah.
OK, Donna Crate, our Middle East Breaking News editor, thank you very much for joining us with the latest on the story and the developments there in the Middle East. Now, here in the UK, the Prime Minister will promise a tax cut for pensioners if his Conservative Party wins the general election on the 4th of July. This as Labour is set to focus on business, with Rachel Reeves due to make a major policy speech later on as well. Our UK politics reporter James Wilcock joins us now for more on all of this. James, good morning. What does this say about the battle lines being drawn over the economy with these latest announcements?
Good morning, Stephen. It says that both parties are trying to tell a very different message about where they see the economy going. I mean, for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, the Conservative Party have turned the economy around, he'll say, and therefore he can make giveaways. And for pensioners, where the story of the past decade has been George Osborne abolished this kind of tax-free allowance because it was seen as a way of giving higher pensioners big tax breaks. Now what has happened is, since then, obviously, inflation and the triple lock have led to the basic state pension. It comes in at around £11,540 a year. Now, in a few years, the personal tax-free allowance for everyone in the UK is currently at £12,570. So you can see pensioners will start to get taxed on their state income. So Sunak's saying, we have, after turning the economy around, we can give back on that front. And so he would introduce what is being called the triple lock plus or the quadruple lock, which would put pensioners on their own special tax exemptions, taking them out of having to pay income tax. Whereas for Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is also speaking today. She says, no, completely reject this idea that the economy has turned a corner. We're only in this mess because of the Conservative Party. And I am being trusted by business leaders to return us to growth and with economic stability. So there are very, very key dividing lines now on where both parties would take the economy if they were to win.
Yeah, because the existing pension triple lock, this is the guarantee the pension rises by the highest of either earnings, wages or inflation wages or 2.5%. This is something that is already a huge item on the budget here for the government. How much would the change that the Tories are proposing add to that cost?
Well, I do want to pick up some of the Conservative language here because they're calling this a tax cut. Now, because it's a threshold that's being frozen and then they would unfreeze it, it's technically not imposing a tax rise. It is worth saying a lot of these spending pledges are really stacking up, Stephen. If you look at the Conservatives, they are pledged to increase defence spending 2.5% of GDP. That's about $6 billion a year. The National Service Plan they put out over the weekend, that's another $2.5 billion, which they say would come from levelling up funds that were coming after the EU, but still more spending. This would be another £2.4 billion. And all of this in addition to the fact that Bloomberg Economics say that because the government haven't updated their spending plans for the next budget, they predict a $45 billion black hole in government finances over the next 5 years. So it really is a lot of big spending commitments by the Conservatives at a point where they're already very, very fiscally constrained, and ones that Labour are quite eminently choosing not to make and are rejecting and are throwing a lot of political mud at the Conservatives for making these kind of claims.
Well, let's turn to the Labour announcement then. So we've had these 120 business leaders signing a letter supporting Labour on the day, as you said, that Rachel Reeves is making this speech. How significant is that support for the Labour Party?
I mean, you can tell I'm bringing the cynicism from both sides this morning, Stephen. I mean, look, you've got to take these lists with a big pinch of salt. Obviously, business leaders want to support the party that is 20 points ahead in the polls. And also, it gives no reflection of kind of what sectors, if these people are from all sorts of sectors of business, how supportive they will be, how supportive the sectors are as a whole. Having said all of that, you couldn't imagine a list like this being put out in 2019 for Jeremy Corbyn. It mimics a lot of sort of the David Cameron kind of pro-business policies. It really is a sign of how the amount of support Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has won from business leaders across the UK, and a sign of where the party has moved on. Notably, no FTSE 100 CEOs in there, but it they normally don't choose any sort of major sides in any election anyway. So Labour will trumpet this as a sign of they have won the trust of the business community and therefore can be trusted to bring stability to the economy and bring investment back to Britain. It is an electioneering slogan, Stephen. There's no getting around that. But it is one that a previous Labour Party could not have achieved, and it is worth noting that.
OK, James, we're coming up towards the end of the first week of the campaign, believe it or not. How are things going so far?
So far, very little has changed in the polls. And we're keeping a close eye on them here at Bloomberg to see where things would shift. Now, Rishi Sunak, as we've sort of noted, is taking a policy of trying to please much older voters, which seems to suggest he seems to be very worried about the threat from the Reform UK party and on the right. Meanwhile, Labour, you've also spotted them campaigning in Scotland quite a lot, which is quite interesting in terms of like they're trying to take seats away from the SNP and aim for this kind of centrist economics message. We'll see where that develops going forward. I mean, Bloomberg's Alex Wickham, our political editor, is saying that for some, the Conservative campaign seems to be trying to get Reform voters home and then maybe doing a pivot in coming weeks. The other side of it we keep watching out for is any kind of big election TV debates and the manifestos, these crucial manifestos. Well, the parties really can't hold anything back once those are published. We'll be expecting those in sort of the coming weeks, Stephen. So they are when we really will start to get serious costings as opposed to these sort of big picture, attention-grabbing announcements.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.